Chapter 1. My wife died 12 years ago and the game began soon after that. But I can't remember exactly when. I continued to live in this house after she died. I still live here. It's a big house, but I don't want to move to a smaller place. I love this house and everything in it. You see, I haven't got many friends, and all of the things in this house are important to me. I can't live without them. Sometime after my wife's death, I realized that my bedroom was haunted. It's the only room in the house that's haunted. One night, I suddenly realized there was a ghost in the room. I wasn't afraid because this ghost was friendly. It was a happy ghost. I always wanted to laugh when it was in the room. You'll say it was my wife's ghost. I don't know, I always think of the ghost as he, not she. I named the ghost Poldy. I made up the name Poldy from the word poltergeist. You know that a poltergeist is a playful ghost. It likes to drop things on the floor, it likes to make a noise, it likes to throw things round the room. It likes to move your bed and to play games. Poldy was friendly and playful, so we made up a little game. We play it every night. We've played it for years now. In fact, I must always play the game before I go to sleep. I can't go to sleep if I don't play it. Poldy doesn't appear at midnight or anything like that. He's not the kind of ghost. He's always in the room. But he only appears when we play the game. Of course, I don't have to play the game, but I always want to play. I know Poldy does too. I'm writing this story because I want to tell you about this game. Nobody knows about it. My best friend, perhaps he's my only friend, doesn't know about it. I know about it and Poldy knows about it, and that's all. It's our secret. But I'm talking too much. When you live alone, you're always talking to yourself. I must begin at the beginning. My name is William Harris. I'm 48 years old. Perhaps you've heard of me. I'm not famous, but many people have heard of me. You see, I'm a writer. I've written about 25 books. I write all kinds of stories, love stories, detective stories and, yes, ghost stories. But don't get the wrong idea. This isn't just another ghost story. This is different from any story that I've ever written. Why? Because it's a true story. Everything in this story has really happened. In fact, strange things are still happening. I'm not a famous writer, but my books sell quite well. I have the money to live in this nice house. I can live in the way that I want to live. I'm not rich, but I'm not poor, either. I live simply. I've always lived simply. When my wife was alive, I didn't live very simply. We went out a lot. We had a lot of friends. Since she died, I don't go out very much. I like to stay at home and write my books. Just now, I'm writing another detective story. My readers like my detective stories best. I made up the famous detective Filbert Wiley. Perhaps you've heard of him. Perhaps you've read one of my Filbert Wiley stories. I've stopped work on my new Filbert Wiley book to write this story. I have to write it now while there's still time. But I must tell you something about myself first, and about my wife. Life was very different for me when she was alive. My wife's name was Julie. She was 2 years younger than I was. She was completely different from me. She liked to dance and sing, she liked to go to parties. Our house was always full of people in those days. Put a suit on, William. Apostrophe, she often said to me. I don't like suits. Put a suit on meant many things. Perhaps we were going out. Perhaps friends were coming to dinner. Perhaps we were having a party. I could never be sure. Anything could happen. I never knew about it before it happened. My life was in Julie's hands. Without her I was nothing. I didn't want to meet the world, so Julie brought the world to me. It was a wonderful life. It was wonderful because Julie made it like that. All our friends were jealous of me. Lucky old William, they often said. Lucky man to have a wife like that. He's so quiet and so uninteresting, and she's so alive. Oh yes, they were jealous. You don't often see happy people, really happy people, I mean. And we were happy. That was our secret. Love was our secret. I loved Julie and she loved me. Then, suddenly, Julie became ill, very ill. I called the best doctors, but they couldn't do anything. I looked after her day and night. But in 2 short months she was dead. Dead. I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it after all these years. When she died, part of me died with her. Now she lives in my memory. I can't forget her and will never forget her. I didn't want to look for another wife. Julie was my wife for 12 years and now she's been dead for 12 years. Sadly, we never had any children. So when she died, I was alone. I shut myself in my house. I did nothing except work. At first, I wrote my books because I didn't want to think of my dear wife. The pain was too great. In time things were a little better, but the pain has never really gone. I still feel it sharply when I think of Julie. She's still alive in my memory. Of course, I lost nearly all my friends, all those jealous friends. They liked Julie, but they didn't like me very much. Without Julie, I didn't go out. I didn't go to parties. I didn't ask other people to come to my house, and all my friends soon left me. Nobody was jealous of me. I wasn't lucky old William, just poor old William. Now I have only one real friend. His name is Louis. He's a writer too. But I don't know anything about his books. I haven't read any of them. In fact, I haven't seen his books in any bookshop. Louis and I never talk about books. That's because we have the same interests. We both like chess. We have a game of chess once a week. Louis comes to see me every Wednesday. He always arrives at 8 o'clock in the evening and we play chess for about 3 hours. Sometimes we play a number of games, sometimes only one. At about 11, Louis goes home and I go to bed and play a different kind of game with Polly, but I'll tell you about that later. Louis is really a very good friend. We play chess and never talk very much. Sometimes we don't say anything all evening. Good friends don't need to talk. Louis knows me very well and I know him very well. We've been friends since we were students together. Louis was my friend before I met Julie. He knows a lot about me. But there are some things that he doesn't know. He'll be surprised when he reads this story. Louis and I have played chess together for years. He often came here when Julie was alive. Julie and I never went to parties on a Wednesday, because that was always my day. I must tell you that Louis will be here tomorrow. It's Tuesday today. Tuesday morning. I'm sitting at my desk in my study. I'm writing this story. The winter sun is shining through my study window. It's a beautiful day, but I don't want to go out. I never want to go out these days. Filbert Wiley is my only company. Just now I'm very tired, very sleepy because I didn't sleep well last night. I played a game with Polly and it didn't end for a very long time. I'll tell you about this game, but not yet. Well, that's my life. It's a very simple life and not a very interesting one, is it? How can life without Julie be interesting? Here I am, a middle-aged writer, alone in a big house. I have only one real friend in the world. I have my books. I have Filbert Wiley, the famous detective. Perhaps I lived through Filbert. I have my chess and I have my memories. But it's not a sad life and it's not a very quiet life. A lot happens in this house. There's a lot of noise and laughter. Because I have Poldy. And I haven't told you anything about Poldy, yet. Poldy and laughter go together. I mean, they went together at first. I don't know when the game began. I've already told you that. I can't remember when I first met Poldy. But I can remember very clearly how I met him. I can remember the first time that he appeared. The first time that I realized he was in my bedroom. I can remember every detail. So I want to tell you about it in detail. My bedroom wasn't haunted when Julie was alive. Or perhaps it was and I didn't realize it. I'll never know. Do you believe in ghosts? I've written a number of ghost stories, but they were only stories. I never believed in ghosts before. And I'm not sure I do now. But I know one thing. I'm sure there's a poltergeist in my bedroom. I can't say more than that. Here are a few details about my bedroom. You need to know them before I can tell my story. There's a big double bed in the room. Yes, it's the same double bed that Julie and I slept in. The head of the bed is against a wall. I sleep on one side of the bed. It's the same side that I've always slept on. There's a bedside table next to the bed. There's a bedside light on the table. There's a light socket near the floor. The light socket is for my bedside light. My light has a long cord. There's a plug at the end of the cord and this plug goes into the light socket. Don't laugh at these details. They're all very important. You'll understand the reason soon. One dark winter night, I was reading in bed. It wasn't an interesting book and I was very sleepy. I usually switch off the light when I want to go to sleep. My light has a small white switch, but that night I didn't switch off the light in the usual way. I don't know why, strangely, I reached over the side of the bed and pulled the plug out of the socket. Why did I do this? I still don't know. It was a funny thing to do. When I pulled the plug out, I suddenly wasn't sleepy. I was awake, really awake. The room was dark, completely black, but my eyes were wide open. My book fell to the floor. It hit the floor with a loud sound, but I didn't notice. I sat up in bed with my eyes open. I rested my back against the head of the bed. I looked into the dark room. Of course, I couldn't see anything. But just then, I knew there was someone in the room. I didn't know where in the room, but she, was somewhere in front of me. Many minutes passed. I looked hard into the dark. I waited, but I still couldn't see anything. I wasn't afraid. The person in the room was very friendly. I was happy. I couldn't hear anything, but there was laughter in the air. "Who is it?" I called. "Who's there?" But there was no answer. I waited for a long time. The person in the room was a friend, a good friend. I wanted to meet this friend very much. If I switch on the light, perhaps I'll see him, I thought. I pressed the switch on my bedside light. I pressed it on and off, but nothing happened. Then I remembered. The plug wasn't in its socket. So I reached over the side of the bed and pushed the plug back into the socket. Suddenly, the light came on. The room was empty. I could feel it. I knew the person wasn't there. I pulled the plug out again and waited. Nothing. The room was still empty. I put the plug in and the light came on again. There was still nobody there. I switched the light off, from the light switch, but nothing happened. I was alone without my friend. I stayed awake for many hours. I thought, it's a poltergeist, and immediately the name Poldy came into my head. I called out, "Boldy! Boldy!" Apostrophe, but he didn't come back. In the end I fell asleep. But I knew something important was happening to me. This was my first meeting with a friendly ghost, my first meeting with Boldy. This was the beginning. Chapter 2. I woke up late the next morning. The cold winter sun was already up. My room was light. I sat up in bed and thought about the night before. Did those things really happen? Was it all a dream? I looked over the side of the bed. Yes, my book was on the floor. I looked at the light and the plug. Yes, the plug was in its socket. The details were right. I got up slowly. I washed and had breakfast. Then I went to my study. I was writing a detective story at the time, I remember. The adventures of Filbert Wiley soon filled my day and I forgot about the adventures of the night before. I finished work early. I wasn't sleepy in the evening, but I went to bed earlier than usual, at about 10 o'clock. I sat in bed and thought about the night before. I didn't want to read, so I sat quietly with the light on. Then, very carefully, I switched it off, from the light switch, and waited. I looked into the dark room. Nothing happened. The room was empty. This is silly, I thought. I switched the light on again and got a book, an interesting one this time. I read for a long time and began to feel sleepy. I put my book on the bedside table. Then I wanted to switch the light off. But I didn't use the switch, I don't know why. Strangely, I reached over the side of the bed and found the cord. Then I found the plug and pulled it out of the socket. Immediately, I knew Poldy was there. The friendly ghost was somewhere in the room. "Poldy," I called. There was no answer. I got out of bed and walked round the room. Poldy was there. I knew it. In the end, I went back to bed. I reached over the side and pushed the plug into its socket. The light came on. Poldy wasn't there. When I switched the light off again, from the switch, he didn't come back. I switched the light on and off a number of times, but nothing happened. So I went to sleep. The next night I made an important discovery. It was my first important discovery, the first of a number of discoveries. I went to bed at my usual time. I didn't read. I immediately switched off the light, from the light switch, and waited for Poldy, but he didn't appear. But when I pulled the plug out of the socket, he appeared. Or I felt he was there. When I put the plug back in, he disappeared. This was my important discovery. Poldy never appeared when I used the light switch. He appeared only when I pulled the plug out. He appeared only once. When I put the plug back in, he disappeared. He didn't come back. I tried this the night after. I pulled the plug out when I went to bed. Poldy was there. I put it back and the light came on, Poldy wasn't there. I pulled the plug out again, but he didn't come back. After that I put it back and pulled it out a number of times, but nothing happened. So I knew. Poldy came only once, when I pulled the plug out. He went away when I put it back. For many nights after that, I enjoyed Poldy's company. Sometimes I sat in the dark for hours with Poldy in the room. I enjoyed this very much. I could bring him into the room or I could send him away with the light plug, but I could only do it once. I could keep the plug out of its socket for a long time. In that way I was able to enjoy Poldy's company for hours and hours. I was happy when Poldy was in the room. I often called to him, but he never gave me any sign of his presence. I could only feel his presence, there was no other sign. I never told anyone about Poldy. Louis came on Wednesdays and we played chess, but I never told him my secret. One Wednesday evening he said to me, "You're very well, William. Always smiling and happy. It's nice to see you like this. Perhaps you have a secret life." I smiled and said nothing. It was true, of course, I had a secret life, but I didn't tell Louis about it. I know he's my best, my only friend. But I don't think he can understand things like this. I enjoyed Polly's company in this way for nearly a year. Then one night something strange happened. I pulled the plug out and Polly was in my room. I was sitting in bed. I called out to him, "Polly," and he gave me the first sign of his presence. I heard a knock. It came from the other side of the room. Then there was another knock. The knocks got louder and came nearer and nearer to my bed. Then the knocking stopped. I wasn't afraid, in fact, I laughed. Then the knocking began again. It moved away from my bed to the other side of the room. It was a strange knocking sound. How can I describe it? Well, it was like someone with a wooden leg. It was like a wooden leg on the floor. When a man walks with a wooden leg, you can hear a knock. Knock, 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 like that. I was very happy. At last I had a sign from Polly. I could feel he was there. And I could hear he was there. He's not afraid of me, I thought. So he's given me a sign. Every day I worked in my usual way, but my life was different now. Every night I enjoyed Polly's company. He became more and more friendly. He gave me different signs of his presence. Sometimes he shook my bed. I laughed and he shook it again. Or sometimes he shook a chair in my room. I could hear it on the floor. Or sometimes he threw things round the room. I couldn't see them in the dark, but I could hear them. Once a hand mirror flew right past my face. Sometimes Polly opened and shut my bedroom door. He did this very quickly a number of times. Sometimes he played little jokes. Once I found my shirt in my bed. Another time I found one of my shoes in my bed. I always laughed at these jokes. I think Polly liked to hear laughter. He always knocked at the window or shook my bed. I tried hard to see him. I looked into the dark room, but I never saw anything. But I could feel his presence and I could hear him. When I got tired of all these jokes, I pushed the plug back into its socket. The light came on and Polly went away. Then I always switched the light off and went to sleep. One night I made my second important discovery. Polly was in my room. He walked to my bed and away from it many times. He shook my bed and knocked at my door. In the end, I was very sleepy. I'll put the plug back in, I thought. The light will come on and Polly will go away. Then I'll turn it off and go to sleep. I reached over the side of the bed and picked up the plug. Suddenly, Polly pulled the cord and the plug flew out of my hand. I had to find it, and it wasn't easy, and I put it in the socket. But this was an important discovery. Polly didn't just want to give me signs of his presence. He didn't just want to play little jokes. He wanted to play a game with me. In the end, we made up this game with the light plug. The rules of the game were very simple. But it took us a long time to make them up. The rules grew. They were like this: Rule 1, I went to bed with the light still on. Rule 2, I pulled out the plug from the socket and Polly appeared. I didn't only feel his presence, he always gave me a clear sign. I heard knock, knock at the other side of the room. Rule 3, Polly then began to walk towards my bed. I had to put the plug back in the socket before he reached my bed. Polly had to reach my bed before I put the plug back in. That was the game. If Polly reached my bed first, he won. He shook my bed and the game began again. If I put the plug in first, I won. Polly disappeared when the light came on. He didn't return. We played this game every night for a long time, perhaps 2 years. Polly usually won a number of times each night. I laughed a lot when we played. It was a very happy game. And then something went wrong. I don't know what and I don't know how. But something went wrong, very wrong. Chapter 3. Your move, Louis said. My move? I answered. I've just moved. No, Louis said. I've just moved. It's your move. He pointed at the chessboard. Don't be silly, Louis, I said sharply. I know when I've moved. And I know when I haven't moved. Well, you haven't moved and it's your move, Louis repeated. You aren't watching the game, William. The game? I cried suddenly. Which game? Who told you about the game? What do you know about the game? I've never told anyone about the game. It's my secret. Do you understand? It's my secret. Just Polly and I. I was shouting. I could hear my voice. I stopped suddenly. Louis was looking at me strangely. Is there anything that you want to tell me, William? Eh? What? Is there anything that you want to tell me? There's something on your mind. There isn't anything on my mind, I said, thinking, I must be more careful. I looked up at Louis. You're right, I said. There is something on my mind. It's this new Filbert Wiley story. It's on my mind all the time. It's a story about a game. The game's on my mind. I'm sorry I spoke like that a minute ago. That's all right, Louis said kindly. Your story sounds very interesting, but now we're playing a game of chess. Yes, I must think about that, I said. Who is this? This Poldy? Louis asked. Poldy? I cried. What do you know about Poldy? Who told you about Poldy? I could hear my angry voice again. I was shouting. Again, I stopped suddenly. I'm sorry, I said. You told me about Poldy, William, Louis said. A minute ago you said, just Poldy and I. We. Apostrophe. Did I say that? I asked. Yes, Louis said. I know you very well, William. You haven't got many friends. Is this Poldy a new friend? Poldy is a very unusual name, isn't it? It is an unusual name, I said. I'll tell you about Poldy if you want to hear about him. Poldy is only a character in my new Filbert Wiley story. What sort of character? I don't know. He's a playful character. He plays all kinds of jokes. I mean, is he good or bad? Louis asked. Oh, he's good, I said immediately. A very nice, person. He's kind and funny and I like him a lot, but… Apostrophe yes? Well, sometimes I think he's bad too. Poldy's character isn't clear in my mind. Sometimes I think he's evil. You know, very evil. Evil. But you said he's funny and kind and playful. That's an interesting point, I said. Tell me, Louis. Can a person be evil and funny and kind and playful at the same time? What do you think? I've never thought about it, Louis said. I'll tell you about Poldy, if I can, I said. I'll try to tell you. Poldy. Suddenly, I heard a loud knock from upstairs. Louis and I were in the living room. The living room is below my bedroom. The knock came from my bedroom. What's the matter, William? Louis asked. Your face is white. You were telling me about Poldy. Did you hear a knock, Louis? I asked. Like this. I picked up a wooden chess piece and knocked on the table. Like a wooden leg on the floor. Like a man with a wooden leg. No, Of course not, Louis said. I didn't hear anything. But it came from upstairs. Number. It's very quiet in here. Then I probably imagined it. Yes, Louis answered. You imagined it. You're a writer, William, and you live in your imagination. But you must be careful. Imagination can be dangerous. In what way dangerous? Well, it can rule your life. You're working too hard. You don't go out enough. You have an uninteresting life, in the real world, I mean. You're in your study all day. You're alone in this big house. Then at night you sleep and the next day you're in your study again. You need friends. You need the air and the sky and the sun. You don't live as a person but only through your imagination. And that's dangerous because adventures in the mind can rule your life. You start to think this Poldy is a real person. But he's only a character in one of your stories. He's just like Filbert Wiley. He isn't real. He doesn't exist. Oh, but he does exist. Yes, but only in your mind. So he exists and is real. Hamlet was one of Shakespeare's characters. But he exists. He's real. Queen Elizabeth I existed. She was alive and she ruled England, but she's not more real than Hamlet. Don't you think that Hamlet is a real person? Like Queen Elizabeth was a real person? I mean they're both real persons in our minds. That's an interesting point, Louis said. Things can exist in the mind or in the real world. So the character in your story, this Poldy, is real to you. And I'm real to you in the same way. Right? Right, I said. I always knew you were a thinker, William, Louis said. Now let's get back to this game of chess. It's your move. My move? I've just moved. Let's not start that again. Look, we'll go through the moves from the beginning. I'm white and you're black. Right? Right. Louis went through the game from the beginning. We've both moved 14 times, Louis said. I'm white so I moved first. Now I've just moved again, that's the 15th move. And it's your move. I looked at the chessboard hard for a long time. You're right, I said. I wasn't watching the game. Yes, I told you that, Louis answered. Your mind's on other things. Well, I'm looking at the game now and I don't like it. It's gone wrong. Not for me, but for you, Louis said. Yes, I answered. Something's wrong, very wrong. I can't do anything about it. I moved my king. Louis immediately moved his queen. He picked up the big wooden chess piece and put it down hard on the chessboard. It hit the board with a loud knock. "You can't move anywhere," Louis said loudly. "I'm afraid you've lost the game." I looked at the chessboard. "You're right," I said. "I can't move the king anywhere." "You didn't play very well," Louis said. "You didn't play your usual game." "I know," I answered. "Do you know why?" Louis asked. "Number. Why?" "Tell me." "Because your mind wasn't on the game. Your mind was on this character, Boldy." "I didn't win." "Poldy won." "How?" "Because he rules your mind." Thinkers and writers must live too. Their ideas mustn't rule their lives. "You're right, Louis," I said. Louis looked at his watch. He said. "It's 10 to 12. It's late. I must go." He got up. "Thanks for the game, William. Good night and I'll see you next week." "Thank you, Louis," I said. "Good night." I got up and suddenly knocked the chessboard off the table. It hit the floor and the pieces went across the room. "You've really lost the game now," Louis laughed.